We're returning today to the Psalms in our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast. We're in Psalm 11. And this is a psalm, once again, after a great one yesterday in Psalm 8. We're looking today at Psalm 11, in which we find that the psalmist's life is pretty much falling apart. The first three verses identify that. It says, "In Yahweh I take refuge. How can you say to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For behold, the wicked bend the bow. They make ready their arrow upon the string. To shoot in darkness at the upright at heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do?" So the psalmist here, which appears to be David, is seeing a world falling apart. That verse 3 is often quoted in reference to America, for example. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? If the foundations of our country are destroyed, what can we do about them? I want to read you a quote. It says, "America is running on the momentum of godly ancestry. When that momentum goes, God help America," he says. And that's probably a pretty accurate quote, but I would like to mention to you that it was given by a man named Gresham Masham back in 1937. And so this is not a new quote. This is about going on 100 years old now. And so he was seeing the world falling apart at that time, and he was greatly concerned. So I don't disagree with what he says. We find a lot to be discouraged about in our world right now, in our country. The foundations that seemed to be so strong years ago have eroded in many ways. So what can we do? What can the righteous do when the foundations are destroyed? That's a question that the psalmist has for us. So let's return to this. There's three options that he gives us in this psalm, and if we see the foundations eroding away. Number one, we can despair. We've already seen that in the first three verses. He is pretty much in despair. He doesn't know where to go and where to turn. Everywhere he looks, the wicked seem to be there, out for his scalp, and he is very much afraid of what these people might do. So he is in despair. But secondly, we have the option of trust. And we look at that in verse 1 and in verse 4. Verse 1, he says, "In Yahweh I take refuge." So he starts off very well. I see the enemy around me. I see all these people wanting to get me and cause me harm. But my refuge is not in myself or in my power, but my refuge is in Yahweh or the Lord. I turn to him. And in verse 4, he says, Yahweh is in his holy temple. Yahweh's throne is in the heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of men. And so he sees the Lord not only as his refuge, but in his holy temple. And he's going to throw himself on the Lord. The refuge is the idea of running for safety. And once inside the refuge or the fort, or in this case the temple, the enemy from the outside can't do very much. The issue is are you with the one who can protect you from these sources, from these things? And David feels that the only place he can turn here is to the Lord and trust in him. A third option is to discern the purposes of God. He not only wants to receive refuge from God, he wants to understand what God is up to. The latter part of verse 4 says, his eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of men. Yahweh tests the righteous, but the wicked and the ones who love violence his soul hates. May he rain snares upon the wicked. Fire and brimstone and burning wind will be the portion of their cup. For Yahweh is righteous. He loves righteousness. The upright will behold his face. Now this is one of those psalms that known as the imprecatory psalms, in which the Lord is going to bring vengeance. He's going to bring judgment on the wicked, and the psalmist is rooting him on. And that disturbs our sensitivities. And yet, if we know that God is against sin and God is for righteousness, as he shows us here, then we see that ultimately God must judge sin and God must judge sinners. For God is a God of righteousness, and God's purpose and plan is to let righteousness reign. And that brings us great strength and hope even in the darkest hours. Stuart Briscoe, in his little book on the Psalms, wrote these words. I'm going to read them to you. It's a little lengthy, but I hope you can get something from it. He says, so if you feel like quitting your job, leaving your wife, taking the road, dropping out of school, transferring your membership, immigrating to another country, or moving into your bomb shelter, don't. At least not in discouragement. Hold it a minute and ask yourself the question, have I allowed all these things to get on top of me so much that I have forgotten to trust the Lord? When you have asked yourself that question, try to answer it. Then decide whether you should flee as a bird to your mountain, or whether you should look your discouragement straight in the eye and shout, in the Lord put I my trust. How say ye, flee as a bird to your mountain? So rather than fleeing, he says, turn to the Lord. I think the psalmist is saying the same thing. He is in a position of despair, the position where he feels like running away, but rather than giving up and running away, he runs to the only refuge that he has, the Lord who is in his holy temple and the one who reigns in righteousness. That gives us a great day in the Lord, I trust, as we know who he is and who we can turn to. We'll finish up this week with another psalm tomorrow. I hope you can be with us.